Welcome to this Gestalt IT Roundtable discussion focused on Pure Storage and their recent acquisition of Portworx. I'm Stephen Foskett, editor of Gestalt IT and founder of Tech Field Day, and I'm joined here by a couple of folks from our independent influencer network, as well as a couple of folks from Pure. So before we start, let's meet the folks who are going to be discussing this today. Matt?
Hi, I'm Matt Kixmoeller from Pure Storage. I was one of the first employees at Pure 11 odd years ago and ran product management and marketing there over the years. And now my role is VP of Strategy. So I think about what the next decade at Pure looks like. And as part of that, I help drive our acquisition of Portworx, which is what we're here to talk about today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Franti. I head up product marketing for Portworx. I was an early Portworx employee, so I have kind of seen everything from the very, very early days where you're looking for that, those first couple of customers all the way to where we are today as we think the leading Kubernetes storage and data management solution on the market. So really excited to talk to everyone today and have a good conversation.
Hello, everybody. I am Paul Woodward Jr., the host of the ExploreVM podcast and the Blocks and Bytes show. You can find me on Twitter at ExploreVM.
Hey, everyone. I'm Keith Townsend at CTO Advisor on Twitter, principal and co-founder of the CTO Advisor. DMs are open, so let's have a conversation.
Absolutely. Let's have a conversation right now. So we in the community, Keith and Paul, we've been watching Pure Storage with great interest for a long time. The company started actually just a month before my Gestalt IT started. And so we've kind of grown up in this industry together. And at the same time, while we were watching Pure Storage going for the heart of the enterprise storage market, we saw this emergence of this company, Portworx, which is another company that we're very familiar with. I liked Portworx from the very beginning because of the focus on basically bringing enterprise concepts into the world of container storage. Kix, let's start with you. Is that what you were looking at? What did you see when you looked at Portworx?
Well, look, since you started on memory lane, when we started Pure, one of the core theses there was that Flash was different, and you really had to build a storage platform that was purpose-built for this new use case, this new media. And that's been a huge part of the Pure success. And so as we started to explore storage use cases for containers, we were, of course, taking our all-flash arrays and helping plumb them into the Kubernetes and containers environment through the CSI spec. But it became pretty clear to us that most of the container use cases were a lot more software-centric, a lot more cloud-centric, and only bringing a hardware approach to this market really wasn't going after it in a truly purpose-built way. And so we started to look around and say, look, what are some purpose-built solutions that really started with the Kubernetes and container use case in mind through and through, and very quickly Portworx rises to the top as the obvious solution in that space.
So on the other side of the coin, I don't know, Paul or Keith, what did you think of Portworx when you first saw them?
Interesting solution. I understand the problem from a Kubernetes and approaching Kubernetes from API and consumption perspective. What I don't understand, I mainly talk to centralized IT, so I don't see much Kubernetes at scale in centralized IT. So when I think of Pure and I think of Portworx and this acquisition, I'm a little confused. Like, I don't see the demand, so I'm not 100% sure where they're fitting in the larger centralized IT market, which Pure is very active in.
Yeah, on that note, real fast, one of the things that really actually inspired this acquisition was that some of the largest Pure customers were using the Portworx software on top of Pure. And so that inspired the two companies to start talking. And, I'd say right now, though, if you look at where Kubernetes is being adopted, it's really in customers who build software. So if you think about large scale financial services customers who are building, custom banking software, if you think about large cloud companies, SaaS companies who build, web software, these are the types of customers where containerized applications are the norm at this point. And so, at Pure, we've always positioned our storage for the most mission critical use cases. And, roughly about a third of our sales historically have been into cloud type customers. And so we've been in that zone. And like I said, I think we just saw a lot of customers start to use Portworx on top of Pure to help make the Pure experience better and more natively integrated with containers. And so we said, look, let's bring these two things together.
So is that the value prop that Pure is going with then? Is that deeper integration? Because I'm just kind of curious, much like Keith, like where is this going? You see a lot of companies that will acquire really great products and it kind of disappears or it loses its shine. And obviously, Pure's got a pretty good track record with what they're doing. So just kind of curious, like what the value play is here for not only Pure but also for the Portworx team. This, I'm assuming there's a good symbiosis here, a good mutual relationship out of this.
Yeah, why don't I start with that, then Michael can answer from the Portworx perspective. So I think the first thing I'd say from the Pure point of view is that, the more time we spent in this market with our all-flash arrays, it became clear that the predominant use cases for storage in this space are much more software-centric, much more cloud-centric. And so although a piece of this is making sure we have a great software stack to make our all-flash arrays attractive to users who want to go down that route, we expect the main deployment mechanisms to be either completely in the cloud or software on-prem on bare metal. And so this is not something where we're going to take the Portworx software and connect it to our arrays and make that the dominant deployment mechanism. Quite the opposite. We expect the main deployment mechanism to be bare metal or in cloud. And so, part of our excitement around this was getting a software-defined storage platform, SDS platform in-house that customers could use on any infrastructure and not just on Pure arrays. As much as we'd love to think so, the predominant array out there is not Pure today. So we don't want to limit ourselves to just the subset of customers that use that. And then, this is also just about going after the next generation of cloud native applications. If you look at the predominant use cases on traditional Pure arrays today, it's VMs, it's classic databases, it's ERP applications, it's VDI, it's your traditional enterprise IT packaged app type workloads. If you look at the top use cases on Portworx, it's a polar opposite set of use cases. It's everything in the new data pipeline, message queues, et cetera. It's scale out databases. It's mostly open source software. And so this allows us to go after a whole new set of applications that just, maybe aren't the most centric to our existing storage stack. Michael, you want to answer from the Portworx point of view?
Yeah, I think one of the things that came up when Keith was speaking, I think, Kubernetes isn't about containers, and even containers really aren't about containers. They're both about automation. And the use cases that Portworx is really seeing very quick growth in are those where automation and being able to manage software at scale without adding incremental heads is very, very important. And the Kubernetes kind of famously came out of Google, and because Google had these problems around running Google search and YouTube. And that was a decade ago when they were building those solutions, when they had that scale. Now, if you're a top service provider, if you're a top pharmaceutical company, if you're a top even large government agency, you start to have applications that start to resemble that scale. And you can't hire fast enough in order to make sure that when there's problems that you have an admin who's able to log into that server, figure out what's wrong, restart it. And so for certain classes of applications in these large enterprises, you need a privilege automation. Kubernetes is really a platform that enables you to deploy and run applications mainly via automated methods and APIs. And when you do that, you have to solve the storage and data management issues. Addition to that, it's not just that it needs to be automated. That automation needs to respond to individual DevOps teams, meaning central IT can't provide centralized policies and management on top of these automated applications. It's actually individual teams within those organizations who are making those decisions, because they know what's in the container, they know what's in the pod. Does it need to be encrypted? Does it need to have a backup policy? Kind of the volume of applications is increasing to a point where centralized IT can't keep track of that catalog and all of the requirements associated with each one. So that gets pushed down closer to the individual DevOps teams. We talk about it when it comes to security as shifting left. We're seeing that shift left happen as well in not just for security, but also, for instance, data protection or high availability. things like that. And so the Portworx platform really exists in order to support those use cases where these modern applications that need to be automated and need to be managed by individuals can do so in a manner that resembles kind of what we were used to in our VM environment, but using these new platforms.
So, Michael, that's really interesting. Help me understand in a DevOps team's journey when they realize, you know what, I need something like a Portworx versus, basic CSI level integration where, containers, I understand them at a small scale. And then as operationally, I have these automation problems and challenges specifically around data that they realize, you know what, this just isn't enough that comes out of the box and this basic integration with traditional storage providers.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I wish it was clearer to everybody from when they started their journey that they would need Portworx, because it's not always obvious. Sometimes you read, the blog post that shows how to get started, in 30 seconds, and you don't realize the difference between that and what it's going to be like in production. So there are a couple of things. One would be around density. So if you have a container, chances are you can use kind of really whatever management process works for you, very manual, or basic automation through your CI/CD system. But when you multiply that by 10 or by 100, and now you have 100 containers to manage, using those systems becomes much more challenging. So that's density would be one. Just kind of the dynamic nature of the environment. When you have a Kubernetes cluster with lots of pods running and multiple hosts, chances are Kubernetes is going to be doing a lot of rescheduling because you've given Kubernetes basically a mandate to say, I need this much CPU, this much memory, this much RAM for each of these applications at any given time. Just make it happen. And because each of those applications has varying patterns of usage, Kubernetes is going to be constantly moving things around. And again, when it's just one or two things, it doesn't really cause a lot of problem. But when it's dozens or hundreds of applications that are constantly moving around your cluster, you can end up having issues. The third area would be when you need to provide more kind of traditional IT enterprise level SLAs. So for instance, you need to be able to restore backups within a particular RTO, or you need to guarantee data at rest and in flight is always encrypted with a particular key that's set up with a particular rotation policy. All of these things where you're trying to do traditional IT operations that were typically managed by an administrator, but now the number of apps that you have to apply those policies to has increased by an order of magnitude. You need to be able to leverage that operation. So I would say it's really about kind of density, scale, but not necessarily in terms of this app has 1,000 containers as part of the deployment, but scale in terms of the number of applications that you're managing. Those are some of the metrics that teams look at. And when they call us first, they've typically run into some of these issues and kind of need to figure out a more scalable way to approach it.
So I have this saying that scale breaks all things. I know that's a saying in general in the industry, but I'm talking about operational scale. Like, we don't always consider operational complexity when we roll out these things. Absolutely. One of which is simple data protection. If I wanted a different data protection mechanism, if I wanted to offer 3 or 4 different data protection mechanisms based on my corporate policies on the type of data, basic CSI integration doesn't give me that. To your point, I have to manually go back and do that. Wouldn't it be great if I could just, in the YAML file, define the data protection mechanism I needed for this application and some system in the back end implemented that for me? Is that basically the gist of the Portworx for that complexity and automation example? Is that an example of something that it would do?
Yeah, exactly. We call these data services. So we have kind of, if you were to look at kind of our platform architecture, we have this thing we call PX Store and PX Backup and PX Secure and PX Migrate, which pretty much do what it sounds like, right? And the way that you enable these data services is part of your YAML file, part of your deployment. It's a flag. right? What type of storage class do I want? And that's going to define your performance. What type of backup policy do I want? What type of security policy I want? So the individual DevOps engineer who's running this application, right, who's the one that's going to get paged, doesn't need to be a security expert. They just need to, check the flag that the encryption flag is checked, and then Portworx is going to make sure that those volumes are encrypted at rest, even if they're backed up and then they're restored in another cluster. They're not going to have been decrypted in that process. You can decrypt them only with the original key. So it's making the simplicity of kind of that YAML simplicity for these more advanced IT operations is a big part of what we do.
I'd also say the example you brought up around backup is a real easy one to understand around how different this infrastructure is and just how fluid Kubernetes-based applications are. So much of the mindset of traditional enterprise backup processes are about backing up machines, and an application might be at best a clustered set of machines or VMs. But a Kubernetes-based application, it can be many, many containers, tens, hundreds, that's fluid, that's changing between what hosts they're on, that's growing or shrinking every day. And so how do you think about protecting that fluid, kind of cloud of what an application is? It's a very different process than traditional backup. And so just take that same thinking towards every dimension of it, towards security, towards RBAC, who gets access to what, you name it.
Yeah, I guess the challenge is, as I wrap my head around, microservices and designing applications in a different way, that one of the problems that occurs is that my data, to your point, it's not, if I back up this Oracle database with an RMAN backup, that is the application, versus this application is based off microservices. And each one of these microservices might have a persistent layer of data that makes up the data for this application. How do I define that? How do I back it up? How do I version that, etc.?
Yep. Exactly. And Kubernetes makes that really easy, right? It's your deployment defines all of the different pods and volumes that are associated with this particular application. The problem is kind of traditional data protection solutions don't speak the Kubernetes language. And so there's this disconnect between the simplicity that Kubernetes provides, but the inability to leverage that simplicity with your existing tooling. So that's where something like PX Backup comes in, where it's basically, it's defined to take advantage and do things the most simple way possible via the Kubernetes native primitives to basically make it so that you can just define it in a YAML and then everything kind of auto-magically works. We know that in technology, nothing is magic, but from a user perspective, if you can take advantage of the primitives that Kubernetes provides, you can make it seem that way in terms of just having to do a flag and now everything is backed up, or the same thing for recovery.
I'd say that overall, one of the biggest challenges I've seen with Kubernetes is one of the things I think Michael was getting at earlier is, essentially, these are tools for developers who maybe didn't understand the enterprise IT space. They didn't understand the value of enterprise IT technologies and enterprise workflows and approaches to data protection and, storage management. And, the thing that struck me about Portworx initially was that here's people who understand sort of how enterprise IT works, but also understand how, container storage works. And that to me was a really valuable bridge because, frankly, it almost is sometimes like the DevOps divide is just too great because, we're speaking different languages, we're doing different things, out of the box, maybe they didn't even think about data protection. If they did, they certainly didn't think about it as in an enterprise context. Am I wrong? Paul, do you want to jump in? How does the enterprise view Kubernetes?
We're seeing more and more adoption. You can't argue that. It's just a matter of getting your IT departments behind it, whether or not it's something that the C-suite is embracing or whether it's something that your core engineers want to get behind. But it's certainly gaining ground. And I actually spend a lot of my time in the mid-market and the corporate sized realm, and we're seeing more and more adoption. There's other players out there who have entered the field, and so we've got all sorts of different options going in to the data center around Kubernetes that it's starting to find its way into most markets, or a lot of the markets you wouldn't even think of. So maybe not even needing that enterprise application, but having features out there like a Portworx, having something out there that's going to help build that foundation properly, I think it's going to be huge, and especially when it ties into Pure, something that a lot of these shops are actually already familiar with. And actually, another question I had, this shoots it back to the Pure side. Obviously this acquisition is new. There's still a lot of planning that's going on, but will we see integration into like Pure One, how everything else kind of all ties back together? And I'd imagine, given the fact that you're talking about bare metal, you're talking about running in cloud, this is going to be something that's a standalone product for a while. It's not going to be just like flipping a switch like with other Pure features, because it's different than other Pure features when they come out. So like, just kind of curious how that's gonna play out, because as I'm out there in my 9 to 5, I'm going to encounter these questions more and more from potential customers and existing Pure customers as well.
Yeah, so I'll take a stab at that, and we're still very much planning through our integration roadmap. But I guess the first thing I'd say is that our number one priority is just to accelerate Portworx's roadmap. It's a great product. It has a lot of things it's building, and so we're investing more in engineering to help that go faster, not necessarily pivoting everyone towards integrating with Pure. But that said, we do see some opportunities for integration with Pure, and just to kind of list a few of them. First off, we have our own storage orchestrator for Kubernetes PSO at Pure. We have Portworx. We obviously need to bring these together into a single solution, so that'll be a high priority item. Second area, as you said, is taking advantage of some of the foundational platform within Pure, the call home capabilities, Pure One for management, at the right level, so that we can deliver a better support experience and bring all that technology to bear. And then, as we grow over time, there'll be opportunity for more optimization between, the Portworx software layer and the Pure infrastructure layer. But we're going to be careful about that, because we don't ever want to, kind of make Portworx running on bare metal or a cloud a second-class citizen to the Pure hardware. If anything, the opposite. We want to make sure the experience on Pure is great. But we fully expect that the cloud deployment mechanism is going to be the most popular. Bare metal is going to be very popular, and so we have to serve all of those as first-class citizens.
Yeah, I guess my last question is around not so. I think of it from a governance perspective, because when you look at the typical enterprise, these groups that don't match up to kind of the cloud native operating model, where you have developers and operators, the enterprise just doesn't work like that. In the enterprise, I have SREs, I have DevOps groups, I have platform groups, and then I have application owners. And probably the only real delineation I've seen is that application owners equals developers, and everything else is IT infrastructure. So as you talk about the sales motion and talking to groups, how does that impact the field for Pure and Pure partners as they have this new tool in their tool belt? Who are they having conversations with, I guess, is the question I'm getting at.
Yeah, great question. And I think it's a very interesting time in a lot of the larger customers right now. And this kind of like cooperation between DevOps and the app team and IT around containers is like just starting. So if you look at the classic Portworx customer, it was absolutely sold into the person who builds the application, the team that runs the application. And it was almost an independent decision. So we have Portworx customers who run Portworx in 8 different places in an organization. It just happens to be 8 different apps that are spread out in different ways. And in those customers, you're now starting to see the enterprise IT team start to say, okay, this Kubernetes thing has gotten big enough. We need to establish shared deployments. We need to establish standards. We need to establish security. And so they're just starting to figure that out and to create more container as a service, centralized deployments. And so the largest banks, the largest telcos, they're all far down this path. Your average enterprise is not. And so from a Pure point of view, I mean, I think we want to sell it on both sides, right? We're absolutely going after the classic DevOps customer and making sure that they understand that Portworx is the best tool for them. But then your classic Pure customer, the infrastructure team, the storage architect absolutely has on their list, I need to figure out a storage strategy for containers, because I know as it standardizes, it's going to come to IT, and that's going to be a problem I deal with. And so we're helping educate and helping bring those two constituencies together.
Excellent. I think that that's actually a great place to wrap, because it helps us to understand really what the strategy is here. And maybe it's helped our listeners to understand really what Portworx is and why Pure wanted to combine these companies. So thank you so much, Matt and Michael, for bringing the Pure Storage and Portworx perspectives here. And thank you, Paul and Keith, for, of course, as always, bringing your independent perspective as a longtime enterprise IT technologist. So those of you watching, again, thank you very much for joining us. This is a Gestalt IT roundtable discussion. You can find more conversations like this. Just go to gestaltit.com, click videos, and you'll see a great deal of video content just like this there. You can also find us on YouTube at Gestalt IT Video. Thanks very much for joining us.